Welcome back to Family Foundations for Optimal Sexual Health. Our goal is to equip and encourage parents to guide and support their children toward optimal sexual health, protecting their current and future well-being in a culture that sexualizes children. When we talk about optimal sexual health, we're referring to a holistic approach, and we're talking about physical health, mental health, emotional, social, and relational, and spiritual health. In session 1, we answered 5 questions. First question was, is youth sex a risk? And we said, yes, it is. Are youth sexually active? Yes, some are. And then we looked at the 2 approaches to guide our youth in the area of sexual health, comprehensive sex ed and sexual risk avoidance. And then we examined the factors influencing youth sexual activity. Why are some kids sexually active and others not? And you had an assignment to do. You completed a parent survey where you checked off the factors that would apply to a certain student or a certain child that you know. And in the last session, we identified those factors, and they're divided into environmental, interpersonal, and individual factors. And we recognize that those factors, some of them are negative. They can contribute to youth being sexually active, and others are positive, contributing towards sexual risk avoidance. And then we noticed that some factors were modifiable. Actually, many of the factors were modifiable. And we recognize that it's the parent's role to work to influence those factors, to limit the negative factors as much as possible, and to maximize the positive factors towards sexual risk avoidance. And we recognize that parents make a big difference. And our goal, our role in this series is to provide you with the knowledge and the tools to maximize those positive factors and limit the negative factors.
So this is session 2, adolescent development. And here's where we'll go in this session. We'll look at adolescent growth and development, then the physical, mental, emotional, and relational changes that happen during puberty. We'll look at research around developmental assets, and then we'll give out application, what I call leaning in parenting and empathetic parenting. No matter the ages of your children, some may be younger, some may be older, this content is helpful to review. And also, much of the information may be simple information that you already know when we talk about puberty and adolescence. But what I'm hoping to do is give you concrete, simple language, comfortable language that you can use with your children. We want you to be the primary sex educator of your children. Really, that's the whole point of this series. So let's start out with some simple definitions. Here's puberty, the physical changes that make a person able to reproduce. Well, what is reproduce? Well, we would say making babies. It's a part of the childhood, the child's body growing to be an adult body that can reproduce. The word adolescence is used to refer to the physical, mental, emotional, and relational changes of a child becoming an adult. Or another way of thinking about these across time periods in growth and development, puberty is really the early stage, the beginning of adolescence, that involves a whole host of physical, mental, emotional, and relational changes. And then adolescence is this whole process of moving from childhood up on into adulthood. It usually starts around 11, though it can start younger than that, particularly with females, and can continue on up into the mid-20s even, as we talk about not just developing bodies, but developing brains as well. So a couple of unique distinctions about puberty. It begins in the brain. About a year before anything is seen or felt in the body, the brain begins to change. And it begins at a different time for every person. This is one of the things that makes puberty particularly challenging. At a time when everyone wants to fit in, everyone is different. So it begins at a different time for every person. It begins and progresses differently for each person. It really is a unique process from one body to another. It is all controlled by hormones, which are chemicals that the brain produces and other parts of the body produce to send messages around the body that it's time to grow and develop and get ready to be able to reproduce. Those aren't hormones that we feel or see, but they're happening within our bodies. And again, this can be an anxiety-producing process for young people who aren't in control of these changes. There really is no normal. At a time when everyone wants to be normal, there's no normal for puberty. Normal is not normal. These are really helpful concepts for you to be able to convey to your child with empathy and compassion, clarity in a way that they can relate to and be prepared for and sort of settle into the turbulent times, as we've said, the challenging times of adolescence and growing on into adulthood. We are talking about both changing brains and changing bodies. So let's first talk about some everyone changes, as I call them, changes that both boys and girls go through. First up is the growth spurt. This usually happens as the first sign of puberty. You may take your child in for a checkup and notice that they're growing faster. They may jump up onto a different growth curve on that chart. Their hands and feet begin to grow. You may be buying them shoes faster than you used to. That growth spurt is usually one of the signals that puberty is beginning. Now, everyone is going to grow up to a different height. Some will grow taller than others, but that speed at which they're growing tends to accelerate. There are changes that happen in their skin as the oil glands and cells on the skin begin to produce oil. That can create problems with acne or zits, as they call them. It's helpful to begin daily hygiene and prepare them for this process of caring for their body. But a lot of acne is also genetic and out of their control. No matter how much products they use or medication they use to control it, it really becomes one of those hard parts of puberty that most will grow out of in time. It's a normal part of puberty. There can be changes to hair depending on their type of hair. It may get oilier. Also, it may get curlier, it may get longer, it may just change overall. And the hormones of puberty can even change their eyes. They may need a new prescription, or if they didn't have glasses before, they may need them. All of these changes happening in both boys and girls. Let's talk a little bit more. Again, this is information you know, but I want to give you words and language to talk about it easily with your children. Let's talk about those males and the changes that is happening within their bodies. They may begin to hear their voice deepen as the Adam's apple is growing and developing. Their muscles will begin to develop and take a greater shape. Their shoulders can broaden. Also, their reproductive system will begin to grow and mature as well, all part of the process as they begin to produce sperm, really the signaling of male puberty happening in the testicles as they grow through. What about girls? What are some of the other changes they're dealing with as their bodies are getting ready to carry a baby? So their hips will widen, their breasts or breast buds will develop, their ovaries will mature. Now, here's the thing with girls. I think it's fun to share this with young ladies also, that when they are born, they have all of the eggs they're ever going to have already, about 500,000 of them. They're microscopic. We can't see them. Those ovaries will grow to be about the size of an almond. But they will grow, and those eggs will begin to grow and mature as menstruation begins. And that really will be the signal of puberty beginning in females. As we think about all of these changes, I'm guessing most of us wouldn't want to go back and repeat puberty again. And I want us to remember that feeling and the challenge, the hard feelings that were there. And let's do some leaning in parenting, as I call it, with a compassionate approach. The picture here of a mom leaning into her daughter at a time when our kids are often pushing us out and want to grow in their independence. They're really craving for that love and support of leaning in, knowing how difficult all of these changes can be. As these changes are happening, it's important to remind them about taking care of this growing and developing body. So we want to talk about nutrition. They need to eat a variety of foods across different food groups to get the energy and nutrients that their growing body needs. They all need activity and exercise. The recommendation is 60 minutes, an hour of physical activity each day. It doesn't have to be a rigorous sport. It can be riding a bicycle or walking to school, but we want to keep their bodies and bones and muscles growing well. And then really important during this age is sleep. These growing bodies need rest, time to recover and replenish as they are growing so rapidly during this time. And so they may fight you on wanting to go to bed or not. I love to bring this information when I present to a 4th or 5th grade classroom and help them know, no, you really need sleep. Don't fight your parents on this. They need about 9 hours of sleep each night is the recommendation from pediatricians, and that needs to be uninterrupted sleep. Sleep protects against a whole host of today's challenges, particularly anxiety and depression that we're starting to see in the mental health world more with our young people. Sleep is key. We want to get uninterrupted sleep, so that means sleep without the bzz, bzz, bzz of technology beside them. Put those phones to sleep somewhere else and help them get good sleep. You know, really with all of these, as in so many areas of our parenting, more is caught than taught. They learn by our example. What are we teaching them by what we are doing or what we are not doing that they can follow after? So it's time for us to do some checks in these areas as well. Let's talk a little bit more about changing brains and adolescent brain development. The cognitive development that is happening in the brain is fascinating. And over the last several decades, there has been more and more research to really understand with brain scanning and neuroscience to understand what's going on inside of the brain and what's ahead and what's behind in cognitive development. It's all happening in the prefrontal cortex in the frontal lobe, which is centered up in the front of the brain. And this activity there is often referred to as the executive function or the central processing center for the brain. And we'll look at the list of activities that fall up under this, where they are learning that cognitive maturity isn't complete until about age 25. That's a lot later than their bodies have been finished developing. Their brains are still growing and growing on up until the mid-20s. And we like to say that just because their cognitive maturity isn't complete until about age 25, it doesn't mean that young people can't make good decisions. Oh, they can. They're capable, and we believe in them and want them to know we can, but a lot of that takes guidance and support from adults and parents especially who love and care for them, helping guide them forward. This next slide shows a list of all of the different functions that are coming into place as a part of cognitive maturity. So we've got judgment and moral intelligence and abstract thinking and their perception, planning for the future. They're thinking for the moment. That's in their brain. They're not able to see ahead and make appropriate decisions that take into account consequences and risk. We want to help them there, but at some level they need clear guidance in these areas. The last two show impulse control and emotion control. And as I think about these areas, the research will say that your emotions are complete. They can be happy and sad and mad, and sometimes all at the same time it seems, but the control over them is not complete. So we want to help them get control over those emotions, get awareness of those emotions, and then be able to control them. In fact, this next slide, and there are several of these available on the internet, show a whole host of emotions. We want to help young people have words to express how they're feeling, but help them to do that expressing in a helpful way. One cultural moment I would have you notice, is that a lot of attention's been put on feelings. Just follow your heart. If it feels good, do it. I want to caution you about helping young people make decisions purely on feelings and emotions because our feelings and emotions can fail us. They can lead us astray. They may make us feel one way one moment and one way the next and cause us to make a decision we much later regret. So it's coming into that awareness, coming into appropriate expression and appropriate management of responding to responses. It's not just about feelings. It's taking feelings and backing them up with objective truths that help guide and protect our kids. So that's one note I would make. Another note I would make is that males and females tend to process emotions differently. I think about girls sometimes maybe being more easily to cry or come to tears or get upset, and boys maybe be more likely to yell at a football game or soccer game on TV. And the point there I want to make is male and female emotions are different. It's helpful for young people to learn about emotions differently from their mothers and their fathers and men and women in their lives. Again, to appreciate their feelings and yet keep those feelings in check with rational decision making led by the guidance and support of adults. So now let's talk a little bit more about our changing bodies, or what I like to call our awesome anatomy. If you can frame it up like that, it will be much less awkward. Sometimes it feels like awkward anatomy. If we are relaxed and comfortable with the content and with the information, our children will be more likely to relax, and most importantly, they will be more likely to come back to us with questions. We want the questions. Welcome the questions. If they ask you a question about any of these topics, please always say, "Thank you for asking me," and give a clear and confident, comfortable response back to them. So here's where we're going to go. We're going to go through the male reproductive system and then the female reproductive system in very simple terms. These are drawings you can draw on a piece of paper in your kitchen or living room with them and help them understand the awesome way our bodies were created and how they grow to be able to create new life and reproduce. So here we go. Called the male reproductive system. I like to say, especially when I'm teaching 5th or 6th graders, something like, well, let's just start with the penis. Everybody knows the penis. And behind the penis lies a sac of skin holding the 2 testicles called the scrotum. But up inside the penis, there's a tube called the urethra. And that urethra leads up and goes 2 different directions, up into the bladder where pee or urine is stored, or out into the vas deferens, a fancy word for the doctor that discovered them and named them. The vas deferens are 2 tubes that split there and then go down back to the area inside the scrotum where we see the testes and the epididymis. So testes are where sperm is made. Sperm will be the sort of signature product of the male reproductive system, why we even have a male reproductive system. Its job is to make sperm. That happens in the testes, and then the epididymis is where those sperm are stored. They will ultimately be released. In fact, let's do a little animation here. You'll see a small little, actually it's very large in proportion to what millions of sperm that are produced every day. And that's pretty amazing fact to share with young people also, is just how many millions of sperm are made each day. But what happens is those sperm will then come out through, be stored in the epididymis, follow through that vas deferens, up and out in through the urethra and out of the penis in a process called ejaculation. That happens within a fluid called semen that is passed on through, again, an ejaculation. Its job then is to get the sperm to the female egg for fertilization and reproduction, which we'll talk more about. I usually recommend helping our growing kiddos learn first about their bodies, and then, as we've talked about sort of incrementally, then learn about the other system, and then eventually learn how those 2 systems work together. I don't think they can learn all of that in one sitting. It's not the talk, as we've said, it's many talk. So you might help them grasp the form and function of the male reproductive system. Let's look at how this looks in the female reproductive system. So the females have 3 openings between their legs, and a lot of them don't even realize this. So I like to just break it down in real simple terms for growing girls to understand that there are 3 holes between their legs. The front opening is where the pee comes out. That's called the urethra. The middle opening is the vagina, the opening up into this reproductive system. And then the back opening is the anus, or where the poop comes out, as I like to say in kid terms sometimes, just to help them understand. I will make a note, though, in terms of terminology, it is helpful to use medical terms. They may need some explanation of some of the slang terms that they've heard, but let's try to keep it fairly medical and educational for them to understand how their body works and was formed. So going up then through the opening is the vagina that leads up into the uterus or the womb. That's where the baby is going to grow, right there. It's normally about the size of a fist, but it can grow to be about the size of a baby, a big baby ready to be born. So then going out from the uterus are 2 tubes called the fallopian tubes. Those are narrow tubes that lead to the ovaries. At the end of those tubes, those ovaries are about the size of an almond, and that's where the eggs are stored from the time they are born. So when it comes into puberty and those ovaries are maturing and they're beginning to produce mature eggs that are ready to be released in the menstrual cycle, that egg, and you can see a giant egg there on the screen, will release from the ovaries, be picked up into the fallopian tube, travel down the fallopian tube. If it is not fertilized, then it travels on into the uterus, and if it travels through the vagina, out with the flow of the lining of the uterus, and that's called the menstrual cycle. So let's do that all again. We'll start back in the ovaries with that egg being released. It is released in a process called ovulation. It travels down the fallopian tube, and then if it is not fertilized, it will travel into the uterus, and then with the lining of the uterus, the tissue and blood there will flow out through the vagina, and that's called the period or menstrual cycle. I've shown this to grown mothers, grown women before, and had them go, I never understood what's really happening with my body. So I want us to understand it well and be able to explain it to our girls as well. And boys need to understand this process as well too. So I mentioned back there in the fallopian tube, if it is not fertilized, if it is not met with an incoming sperm, then what happens there, let's talk about if a sperm does come in. So the sperm will be released up in through the vagina, and here it comes, the sperm. There you see him swimming up. He will swim out through the uterus with about 1 million of his friends, and we'll find that one egg. Oh, I found you! And that's called fertilization. I recommend finding an easy video online. There are many of them that show this amazing process of the two cells joining. It's called fertilization. Those two cells begin to multiply. The 2 become 4, become 16, become the millions of cells that make you you. And that all happens down then on into the uterus where those fertilized cells implant and begin to grow for the 9 months of pregnancy. The menstrual cycle can be a little bit complicated. I like to challenge the math brains of 5th and 6th graders or so, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, and show them a graph like this to show them how the menstrual cycle breaks down. So what you're seeing in this graph starts at the top. At the top it says pituitary hormones. That's the brain. That's the part of the brain that is working when we don't even realize that it does. So those hormones are going to cruise along just fine. If you'll notice, the bottom shows us the days of the month. So for the first 14 or so days, they're just fine. And then all of a sudden, there's this big spike of those hormones as they're sending a signal down to the ovaries that it's time to release the egg. That's the top line. The second line is our ovarian follicles. That's the cells in the ovary. And you can see a little baby dark egg in there. And about that 14th day, out comes the egg. It is released on up into the fallopian tube and begins to travel on its way down to the uterus. The third line shows us what's happening in the ovaries with the hormones down there, estrogen and progesterone working together to drive this whole process. You'll notice that progesterone kind of tracks the shape of the last line where we see that endometrial wall. That's the lining of the uterus. It's called the endometrium. Big words here. That's the inside of the uterus. And that wall is thin at the beginning of the month. And then it grows. It's getting ready to house a baby. But if a baby doesn't come, then that lining, when that unfertilized egg gets there, will begin to slough off, and that's the last few days of this cycle called the period. That's the menstrual cycle. This is something you can explain and draw or use a reference book. I would make a caution about books though. If you get a book, make sure it's a book that aligns with your values. Read it first. Don't just hand it over to your child. Don't do that anyway, but you would share it with your child and read it together to explore some of the biology of our awesome anatomy. So going on then from fertilization, it's fascinating to learn about the miracle of life and pregnancy and fetal development. You may have videos of ultrasounds when your babies were growing inside and getting ready to be born. They marvel at this, give them the appreciation and the beauty of life happening from its earliest days all the way through from fertilization to birth. That can be a really exciting time and really prepare your kids for decision making and some of our culture's toughest issues as well. All right, so we've talked about changing brains and changing bodies, and that is a lot. I want to add in a piece here, going back to brains a little bit, on emotions and relationships, and introduce a very simplified version of Maslow's hierarchy of emotional and relational needs. It sets up in this triangle like this. All of us have these basic needs, and I'd like to think through them, and when it comes to our young people, our children. We all have a basic need. The first need here is safety and security. These are things like food, shelter, clothing, water, things that help us feel safe and taken care of. Going on from there then, when those needs are met, we have relational needs of love and connection. This is unconditional love. and relatedness, connection with others in our lives. And then ultimately, we all have a need to know our purpose and contribution. Why am I here? Why does it matter? What difference can I make in the world? And the theory I want to kind of put out to you here is when these needs are met at home, when we as parents can meet these needs in our families, in our homes, then our children will be less likely to go meet them outside of our homes in unhealthy ways. Unmet needs lead to unhealthy decisions. We want to do what we can to fill up these needs in our homes so our children have the security to make healthy and positive decisions going forward. So how can we meet these needs? Well, for safety and security, we can provide monitoring and supervision. We talked about this in our first session, that monitoring is knowing where they are, who they're with, and what they're doing. And knowing where they are. I used to say I want to be the mom who's driving the carpool. Load up my minivan or Suburban and off we'll go, full of the kids, so I'll know who they're with and what they're doing. That takes time and energy that we don't always have, but it is worth it to meet those needs, that they know they're watched over, that they know they're taken care of. But what about those relational needs of love and connections? So we're going to put up here support and love, empathy and compassion. Empathy means seeing and caring and acting on another person's hard or hurt, is my definition. Let me say that again. Seeing, caring, or acting on another person's hard, their challenges, or their hurt, the things they're struggling with. So it's being aware of and leaning in. I think we forget how hard it is to be a kid today. We can add expectation and add layers of stress to our kids without even realizing it. Instead of taking an empathetic approach that says, I know it's hard, I'm here to help. I know you're hurting, I see it, I want to help you. And lean into that as parents. That really provides those relational connections that they need. Oh, they can find those relational needs out in the world. There are groups that are happy to have them. They are doing things that will harm them now and long into their future. So we want to make sure those needs are met at our home. And lastly, what about that sense of purpose and identity? Who am I and why am I here? We have great opportunity to share with them and give them opportunities themselves to find out what makes them unique and valuable. Why do they matter to our family? And a big part of that is contribution. How are they giving? How are they serving? If we're taking care of everything and they don't ever have to, as they say, lift a finger, they are not learning how good it feels to give and serve and be a helper and contribute to those around, which really brings that identity piece into place. So I wanted to introduce that to you as we're thinking about how needy they are in these adolescent years and the ways that we as parents can come along and support them through. The last thing I'd like to share with you is research done by the Search Institute called the 40 Developmental Assets. They identified blocks of healthy development that help young people grow up to be healthy, caring, and responsible adults. They looked at a whole host of external assets, things that are outside of them, like support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of their time. And then they looked at things that are within them, internal assets, commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. And there's a list of them, and we provided this list for you of these 40 developmental assets. The external are shown here. There are 20 of them, and then there are 20 internal assets as well. Similar to what we did with the factors research and factors that influence sexual activity, you can go through these assets and highlight, as we've kind of done on the slide, those that you directly or indirectly impact as parents. Parents have a lot more power than they realize. So we're going to set it up as your homework for this session to review those 40 developmental assets. Think about which ones your children do or do not have and work to bolster them with as many of them as you can. Maybe even set up a plan that would help to do just that. And then the second point we've made is how about discussing that list with your children? Which assets do they feel that they do or do not have within themselves? I think it would make a real robust conversation for you all to take up for this session's homework. So we'll close out session 2 and get ready to dive into an exciting session 3 up ahead. Again, if you need to contact us, that information is here. And thank you for joining us.